Welcome to the Third Spiritist Federation of Florida Conference, Mediumship, a Human Attribute.
Well, good morning. Our topic today, in many ways, is a continuation of our talk yesterday. It comes to illustrate to us what the practice of mediumship with Jesus looks like here in our realm. Actually, it brings it a little closer to home, from Jesus to our daily missionaries, what the practice, again, of mediumship looks like when it's done with Jesus in the heart. And we are going to start precisely where we end yesterday, with this slide that has a statement from the Spirit Aulus at the very end of the book, in the realms of mediumship, as Aulus is saying goodbye to André Luiz and to Hilario. He refers to mediumship as saying that it is an instrument that appears everywhere, and he tells them, look, the farmer is the medium of the harvest, the plant is the medium of the fruit, and the flower is the medium of the perfume. So, as we heard yesterday, we heard that mediumship, for the majority of us, is precisely a concession of God, that looking at the creature, as Alberto Almeida spoke, a creature that has, perhaps in a past life, already used the mediumship tool in a destructive way, then it's given another chance, another opportunity. There are spirits who have been deeply compromised with the law. So God provides this extra tool for enlightenment, and this is the majority of us. So it's like the tool of the farmer. It's like, here's the hole, and through your hard work and through your efforts and through your sweat, you're given the opportunity now to come up with a productive harvest. For some of us, mediumship is already that tool that is producing some fruits, nourishing our own souls in first place, and then the souls of the ones who are walking with us. And for a very few of us, mediumship is going to be like the flower, the medium of perfume. And these are then spirits who are considered missionaries. Different than the majority of us, these individuals possess the mediumistic faculty, not because they are in a process of redemption in the same way that the majority of us are, but it is a faculty that they have conquered. It's a sense in themselves that they have developed. So it stands in a different level. César Braga Said, in the book Forever Friends, that speaks about the friendship between Chico Xavier and Divaldo Pereira Franco, he uses a very beautiful image in speaking about this type of mediumship, when he says the mediumship in these missionaries is like a river that runs, nourishing the bed where it runs, while at the same time reflecting the brilliance and the beauty of the sun. So in these mediums, mediumship is like this river that nourishes the soul, but at the same time is able, like we talked yesterday here, These are individuals who have this crystal mirror inside themselves and their hearts. They're able to reflect the light of the more evolved spirits who send the messages through them. Our talk today is divided in two different parts. In the first part, we are going to try to understand this idea that even for many spiritists is actually unknown. The idea of mediumistic mandate. What is it? What constitutes the mediumistic mandate? What are the components of it? And so we're going to look into it in details. And then on the second part, and I'm telling you beforehand, the most important part, as Daniel said in his last words, let's not get stuck on the phenomena, but go beyond that. We're going to ask ourselves, what is that these mediums have, morally speaking, that these missions have been entrusted to them in first place, so they can truly be the references for us in the ways in which we should deal with our own mediumship. So what is mandate? It is an authorization to act given to a representative. I don't know anything about law, but the first idea that came to my mind sounds like a power of attorney from heaven. Right? Where the medium is given this authorization to act, to be a representative of whom? Of actually a number of spirits, elevated spirits who together are in charge of delivering a mission to earth. And so the medium is the earthly link of this mission. And he's given the authority to act in name of a group of spirits, a team of spirits. And that is precisely what Sueli Caldas Schubert in the book Testimonies of Chico Xavier says. She defines it. Mediumistic mandate gives the medium the responsibility of being a co-participant in a higher plan to be executed on earth. The medium is not only the instrument, but part of a whole program designed by the higher spirits. The best way to understand this concept is to look into the lives of two mediums who have been granted the mediumistic mandate. And we're going to start with this man called Chico Xavier, a man called love, in his mission with us. If someone does not know about Chico Xavier, he was, while he was with us, the biggest medium in Brazil, and perhaps in the entire world. And we're going to start looking at the mediumistic faculties of Chico Xavier. And I read, and I was like amazed by his faculties. And what I'm going to bring to you is just a tiny, 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 tiny fraction. I had to choose something that could tell you about his abilities as a medium. So let me start by saying that his first book was happened when he was 21 years old. It's important for you to know, if you don't know, that he only completed 4th grade. And so he didn't have a lot of schooling. And this book is actually a compilation of 59 poems brought by discarnate poets from Brazil and Portugal. The book is so amazing and it's so incredible that it has actually been the subject of studies, such as the study by Alexandre Rocha published in 2001 in Unicamp University in Brazil, in the department that studies language, where the book was analyzed, the complexity, the beauty of the verses, of the poems. And any person would say that it would have been impossible for someone with the level of education that Chico Xavier had to be able to come up with those verses, with those poems himself. Now, these messages, these poems, were brought in many different ways. Sometimes Chico would be visiting a specific town, such as the town of Campos, and then a spirit that was related to that city, to the history of that city, would come and would present a poem. Like yesterday, our friend cited when he was in the cemetery, that poem that he received in the cemetery when the priest told him, I heard that you receive messages from the dead. They are in the cemetery doing a burial, and the priest looks at him and said, can you hear some paper? Can you receive a message for us? And Alta de Souza presents herself in that moment and writes a poem called Goodbye, Adeus in Portuguese, which is actually published in this book. So that's how the book came about. One of the amazing things about his mediumistic faculty is the speed that he wrote. And just to give you an idea, in 1952, she psychographed 2 books in 2 days. A book called Route or Itinerary, perhaps would be another way of translation, by Emmanuel, with 172 pages, and another book called Our Father by the Spirit May with 104 pages. 2 books in 2 days. This is so amazing that when I showed this slide to Marcelo, he's like, is this true? Where did you get this information from? And so I had to open up, my source to show him. Actually, it's published on the website of the Brazilian Spiritist Federation. If that's not, amazing enough, in the year of 1969, he psychographed 2 books in 1 day. Steps of Life with 156 pages, and Shelves of Life with 184 pages. Maybe it was a Saturday or a Sunday, because and the reason why I say that is because he held a job. This man worked his entire life. It's not that he lived to do that. That's what I'm saying. It had to be a holiday or something. And overall, he psychographed over 412 books. By the year of 1971, over 500 authors had already written through his mediumship. So this gives you, again, a glimpse of his mediumistic faculties. Now, what was the mission given to Chico Xavier? It is again Sueli Caldas Schubert in the book Testimonies of Chico Xavier. There is actually a chapter called Mediumistic Mandate. She states that from that time on, when the book Parnassus was published, books and more books would leave his blessed hands, transmitted by enlightened spirits, so that the mission of the Consoler promised by Jesus would extend itself and would become accessible to all people. So Chico, as a worker of Christ, part of the big mission of the dissemination and consolidation of the Consoler that we talked about yesterday, his mission was the book. And through the book, he was invited to make the teachings of the Spiritist doctrine more accessible and taken to the hands of many. And he did that, as I have said, in his spare time, if you will, because he worked. He never, ever took 1 penny from the work, from all the books that were published, because he would say, they are not mine. I didn't write them. So all the profits and all the benefits that came from the selling of the books were always reverted to many different charities in Brazil. And now let's look at the life and the mission of our brother who has been here with us, Divaldo Pereira Franco. Heaven's spokesman, in the words of Sueli Caldas Schubert in the book The Sower of Stars. Looking at his mediumistic faculties, again, just a glimpse at it, he has delivered over 13,000 conferences in more than 2,000 cities in Brazil and in 65 countries of all 5 continents. He has also a work with the book and therefore has published 250 books, with more than 200 spiritual authors writing through his mediumship and over 8 million of copies sold. But he also is invited not only to speak and to write, but to live the Spiritist message, and has built an incredible work in his state of Bahia, mentioned yesterday several times, where he has adopted over 600 kids, has nowadays over 200 grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and his work benefits 3,000 kids and families. They're attended by his work. And what is Divaldo's mission? As we have said, he is the spokesman for the voices of heaven on earth. And his mission is to reap the gospel to as many people as possible using all means available. By far, the core of his mission is the dissemination of the Spiritist doctrine through his talks, through his speech. But he also has a commitment with the book and has a commitment with the practice of Spiritism. And Sueli Calder-Schubert continues, as a medium, he is called to practice under the light of Spiritism. As a speaker, he is called to emphasize the Spiritist philosophy, and as a person, he has been called to live the Spiritist religion. But they have, as I mentioned, a team of spirits working with them. They are just the earthly link of a much bigger plan. And these spirits are in both realms of life. So there are spirits who are incarnated, who incarnate with them to help them to deliver the mission, as well as part of the team that operates in the spiritual realm. So in speaking about the spiritual team of Chico Xavier, Sueli Calder-Schubert says, our comments have the purpose to show the evidence around the spiritual program of Chico Xavier involving the Brazilian Spiritist Federation, Vantuil de Freitas, and a team of dedicated workers. So here she's pointing out to the incarnate members of this team, citing Vantuil de Freitas, who was at the time the president of the Brazilian Federation and a close friend of Chico, someone who he counted on to share his ideas, share his concerns, who helped him in editing and revising the books as they were psychographed, and who built within the Brazilian Federation the structure that would allow for the books to be published and to be sold and to be distributed. And like Vantuil, Chico had a number of other friends working next to him, because we all need friends working next to us. Even Jesus did. He had 12 at the first hour, and many others who came after to help in the deliverance of his message. But then she says, the mediumship work of Chico Xavier is not only the initiative of Emmanuel and his team, but it obeys the plan of Ismael for the implementation of the Spiritist doctrine in Brazil. Yesterday, one of the questions that I received was, who is Emmanuel? Well, Emmanuel can be alone the subject of an entire conference like this one. For now, I'm going to say that he is the spiritual mentor of Chico Xavier. So when we look at this statement, we see that above Chico, we have the dedication of Emmanuel, his mentor. But Emmanuel is also a link to higher spirits, like the spirit of Ismael, who was given the task of the implementation of the Spiritist doctrine of the gospel of Jesus in Brazil, a task that was delivered by Jesus himself, and it's written and described in the book, Brazil, Heart of the Work, Country of the Gospel. It's a long name, so take a little second to translate. Now, in a letter to Vantuil de Freitas, Chico Xavier speaks a little bit about this spiritual team. And he will write to Vantuil saying, Since then, I am aware that Emmanuel and other friends' efforts are focused on André Luiz, one of the spirits who rides through Chico Xavier. I believe that André Luiz represents perhaps a vast circle of superior spirits. I speak like this because there was a day that the work was interrupted. Emmanuel told me later, when the work resumed, that some meetings had taken place to analyze certain ideas that André Luiz could or should present or not present in the books. And then he refers later on to his own perception. He would see sometimes Emmanuel and Dr. Bezerra de Menezes, who is also part of this team, sitting together with André Luiz and guiding him and discussing with him and determining what would be appropriate to be shared by him, which implies that André Luiz too was a medium of the ideas of the higher spirits that were working with him, just like Emmanuel was the medium for the spirit superior to him, like the spirit of Ismael. And in that we see the organization of the spiritual plane. And there we see the grandiosity of these benefactors working together in the spirit of cooperation that we talked about yesterday as well, so that the message can be appropriately delivered to us. Who is the spiritual team of Divaldo Franco? The spiritual program is vast and comprehensive. Joana de Angelis supervises and inspires loyal representative of Francis of Assisi. She has in Divaldo the spokesman of the program, and with devotion and a solid presence, she inspires the medium so that the ideal can be transformed into a blessed reality. So Divaldo, like Chico, has his mentor, the spirit Joana de Angeli, who is supervised and guided by Francis of Assisi. And it's very touching to see published in the book, The Soul of Stars, the two messages that were sent to Divaldo when he was 23 years old and later on 26 years old by the spirit Francis of Assisi. And one of them, he states, "Happy are the ones who practice goodness out of love as you do. Over you is the caring eyes of your friend Francis." So they have a team and they have mentors. So let's look into the role of these mentors. Emmanuel with Chico, Joana with Divaldo. They are there to protect them. Well, we all have guardian angels and our spirits who protect us, but these mediums, because of the magnitude of their work and their mission, they need special protection. In the book, In the Realms of Mediumship, there is a chapter that talks specifically about the mediumistic mandate, and we see there Ambrosina, the medium, and Gabriel, the spirit, which later on Sueli Caldas Schubert will reveal there is Chico Xavier and Emmanuel. And as he is psychographing the messages, he is surrounded by a multitude of incarnates and discarnates with all kinds of thoughts, concerns, feelings, negative energies a lot of times. And it's necessary that the medium is protected so the work can be done appropriately. So the medium is surrounded by the energetic field of the spirit guide, the mentor of Emmanuel, that grants him a protection so he's not disturbed by all those vibrations and he can accomplish his work. These mentors grant other spirits permission to speak, to write, to use the mediumship of their mediums. In other words, no one can communicate through Chico Xavier and through Joana and through Divaldo Pereira Franco without the consent of their mentors. And the reason why is They oversee the content of the message, and they want to make sure that everything that is said and written fits the higher program that is trying to be delivered. Rhona de Angelis, for instance, when Divaldo Pereira Franco visits other countries, she actually meets with the mentors, the spirits who are responsible for those countries, in order to come up with a plan, in order to determine what is the mission that Divaldo needs to deliver in that specific country. Because we have mentors, and countries have their own mentors, right? And so she meets with them prior to his arrival to establish the plan. They are editors of the messages. So in one case, the spirit, Humberto de Campos, if I'm not mistaken, is invited by Emmanuel to write a message on meat. And it was a hot topic in Brazil at the time. It remains today. Should mediums eat meat or not? I'm not going to give you the answer. I don't have it. But so the spirit writes his answer. Emmanuel reads the answer and says, we are not going to publish this because the answer is going to bring more problems to society than the harm possibly caused by the mediums eating meat. So he determined that the discussion would be more harmful than any harm there was at that time taking place, and so the message didn't go forward, even though it was written by the spirit of Humberto de Campos. They are mediums for mediums. Sometimes the spirits who want to communicate to them are so evolved that they are unable to directly contact the medium itself for the transmission of the message. So, for instance, Emmanuel is the medium for the spirit Veneranda. Veneranda is one of the workers of Nosso Lar, of Astral City, and the only worker in that colony that has personally met with Jesus. She and another one. But she is the spirit who has the greatest number of interrupted working hours. And so this spirit wished to send to us two books about children, books that are actually used in Nosso Lar, and she wanted to deliver to us so we could have, of course, adapted to our material reality. And Emmanuel is the medium. She does not communicate with Chico Xavier directly. In the same way, Divaldo Pereira Franco one time is in France, visiting the church of Teresa of Jesus. And when he's there visiting the church, Joan approaches him and said, Teresa wishes to send a message. He always have paper and pencil. He sits down, and shortly after, he sees himself outside of the body. And as he looks to the infinite, he sees this very, very bright point of light, very, very far away, and then far away, but in the middle, he sees Rhona de Angelis, and she is concentrating. And then suddenly, he sees the light traveling the space, reaching Joanna, passing through her, and when the light reaches him, his hand starts to write. And when it comes to the end, the spirit signs the message, and Rhona de Angelis explains to him that she had been the medium of that message, because he could not communicate with her directly. Dear counselors, these mentors walk together with these mediums. And so they will help them. They will never ever solve their problems. We're going to talk about this a little bit. But they are close friends who are counseling them at all times. In one occasion, the Russians decided to do a study on the mediumship of Chico Xavier, offer him actually a substantial amount of money to spend 6 months in Russia so they could investigate his mediumistic faculties. And Chico at the time was contemplating the possibility of going until the day that Emmanuel shows up to him and says, "You're free to go, but I'm staying." I wish I had a mentor like that. But these are not concessions. It's important to remember they achieve this status. It's something that they conquer, right? And if they are very friendly spirits, they have set up a very strict plan of action with them. And so, Emmanuel, for the Spiritist crowd, this is a very well-known story. When he first meets with Chico Xavier, he tells him, "Look, here are the requirements for the service. I will work with you, but you must have discipline, and discipline, and discipline," one more time. And Joana de Angelis, when she approaches Divaldo, she tells him, "I have the task of walking with you in this lifetime. I will not promise you favors or commodities that often numb the senses and kill the ideals. Do not wait from me what the world can provide you and what you can achieve with your own effort." She's not there to make his life easier. "But it will be necessary once you are loyal to the gospel of Jesus that you count on me in the same way that I will count on you to meet the needs of our program." So they're asked to live a life of discipline, of patient, angelical patience, of strong will, of self-control, a spirit of service, renunciation, and love for the cause. What is asked for them is to give up on all the pleasures and all the things that the world offers so they can enjoy the treasures of heaven. What's asked of them is to forget about themselves so they can be serving humanity, which is what characterizes all the missionaries. What characterizes the missionaries is precisely the fact that they don't live for themselves but for others. It's precisely the fact that they don't give from what they have, but they give from what they don't have. When they're exhausted, they're still working. When they don't have any more energy, they're still giving. And that's what they have been invited to do by those mentors. And before we shift to the second part of our talk, as we have said, let me just review again some of the mediumistic abilities. They live between two worlds. I mean, incarnates and discarnates are pretty much the same thing. It's part of their daily lives. They write, they see, and they speak. They watch scenes and narrates us. This refers to Divaldo. When he is to his mediumistic abilities, when he is speaking, a lot of times entire scenes are shown to him. Fluidic scenes are built in front of his eyes, and he is able to narrate what he's actually seeing. Other times, he has been taken out of the body by Joana and other spirits. For example, the spirit Amélia Rodrigues, who through his psychography has brought many stories about Jesus' time. She will take him outside of the body to different places and show him entire movies of the scenes of the time that he would be talking about and narrating on his books. Sometimes when he's speaking, entire passages of book are right in front of his eyes with the references that he needs to cite in those moments. They also have received many, many messages in languages completely unknown to them, in different languages. And as if that is not enough, sometimes those messages are written backwards. You can only read once you put in front of a mirror. Divaldo yesterday cited that he witnessed a phenomenon of materialization with Chico Xavier. So he was a medium able of producing physical phenomena, a capacity that was suspended by the year of 1954 by the orientation of Emmanuel, so he could focus on the work of the book. There is something that Sueli Calder Schubert talks about in her book in chapter 14 that she calls decentralization of the brain. So when Divaldo is speaking, a lot of times what happens is not only he is seeing something in front of him, but also so his mind does not interfere with the message that is being given by the Spirit. He has the habit of counting how many chairs are in the public. So his own ideas don't mix, don't interfere with the message. I was standing back there and I said, let me see how many people here today. When I got in 20, I got tired. And so he does that in the course of the lecture. And if that is not enough, he's also still able to perceive what's going on, spiritually speaking, at the same time. So he's reading, he's counting, and he's perceiving all at the same time. And they have what's called mediumistic memory, this amazing memory, right? So it wasn't so fair, the comment yesterday, because they have this mediumistic memory where they can tap into their deeper memories. And Clóvis Tavares, in his book, 30 Years with Chico, he talks about several times when Chico came to campus to visit, and he would meet this crowd of people on one day, and then on the next day, he would meet someone and say, hello, Miss Maria, how are you? And people were like, how does he know the name of this person? If he met this person yesterday in the midst of like hundreds of other people. Okay, this is very exciting and it's pretty impressive. But Sueli Calder Schubert, now in the book Spiritual Dimensions of the Spiritist Center, she says, we see in our planet millions of creatures under the web of tortuous mediumship. Millions with useful psychic abilities. Many trying to develop resources in the area of mediumship and rarely obtaining a mediumistic mandate for the work of fraternity and light. And as we recognize, sublime mediumship is a service that we must edify, even though this glorious achievement may take us centuries. This is our goal. As I said yesterday, I'm looking at an audience of Christ in potential. And so, this is our goal. It's possible. It's the practice of mediumship with Jesus. But it is rare. And why is it so rare? So I'm going to go back to the Medium's book. At the very end of the Medium's book, there is a message by Joan of Arc. It's a very important message that we should put in our refrigerator so we read it as many times as we eat. And the message says, God has charged me with a mission which I must accomplish together with believers blessed with the mediumistic mission. The more grace they receive from on high, the more dangers they will face. And these dangers are all the greater when they spring for the very favors God grants them. The faculties that mediums enjoy draw praise, compliments, and adulations from others. Therein lies the danger. These same mediums who should always remember their former incapacity, nevertheless forget it. But they do even more. They attribute to their own merit what they owe to God alone. The more skillful they become, the more they are led to attribute to themselves merit that does not belong to them. I could never remind you too often to ask for help from your guardian angel so that they may aid you, always remaining vigilant against your cruelest enemy, pride. This is very serious. Perhaps the most serious thing that I'm going to say in these 2 days. Because the human soul is very, very frail. A frailty that comes from the distance between the Creator and us, where we don't recognize yet that we are divine beings, that we are light. And because we are unable to recognize, we live our lives seeking outside of us people who can tell us how good we are, who can compliment us, because we lack so much this sense of divinity from within. We have so little love for ourselves that we are always, always seeking for someone who can tell us how good we are. And when that happens, we hold to that illusion of that compliment tightly. And we start to believe that we are indeed great, not from the essential point of view, but from a point of view of the ego. And therefore, this message is extremely important in a times where all the social media become stages for spotlights, where spiritists, among others, are using these media to promote themselves. Very dangerous, very dangerous. And what can we possibly do to fight this tendency? We need to seek the references. And this is a very, very beautiful image that brings a strong reference that should stay in our minds, but mostly in our hearts. The candle that lights itself with the intent of illuminating the path cannot have other desire other than consuming itself, so light prevails. What these mediums have done, these missionaries, they have consumed themselves in work, in service, in silence, running from the spotlight. It took years for Clóvis Tavares to convince Chico Xavier to let him write about his legacy. He wanted to write not because he wanted to make him into something that he was not, but he needed to share his experience, and Chico resisted and resisted and resisted. And we, for nothing, we do marketing of ourselves on Facebook. Be careful. Be careful. Because that really is dangerous, as Joan of Arc has said. And the idea is for one to consume itself, to disappear. Just like Paul said to us at some point of his life, when he disappeared, it's no longer me who is living, but it's the Christ who lives in me. And that is the idea. Is that the idea that we disappear so much, the ego, the illusions, so the light of Jesus Christ, of the message, can be the only one shining, the only one prevailing. And there is another very, very beautiful image that I would like to share with you today. Divaldo Pereira Franco, when he publishes his first book, he goes home with the first book on his hands, and he puts it down, and he's human, he's touched with emotion, he's happy. We write a poem or do a little something, and we're so proud of ourselves. And so he had this first book, and he's looking at it. The room was a little dark, and then suddenly Joana de Angelis appears like an angel. She was very illuminated that day. And she brings a rose bud on her hand, a fluidic rose. And she places the rose on top of the book. And Divaldo looks at the rose blooming fully. But then it starts to wither. And then, little by little, the petals start to fall. and they stained the green cover of the book as if they were made of blood. And Rhona joins him in that moment, not to share the emotion that he was feeling or the joy that he was feeling, but it was the beginning of his mission. So she was there to warn him. And she said to him, "This is the symbol of your psychographic future. Do not expect flowers. The flower is the message. Your part is suffering and hard work." Wow. Thank you for the flower, right? Why suffering? Why suffering? Because these men were called, as we have said, to renounce the joys and the pleasures of the world, but beyond that, they were many, many times accused, persecuted. Many times their work was mocked. Chico Xavier, for instance, received letters from people within the Spiritist movement asking for how much he had sold himself to the Brazilian Spiritist Federation. He was taken to court by a family of a spirit who wanted the profits of the selling of the book. And this is just the beginning. We can tell you right now all the tribulations that these two men had to undergo in their lives. And the recommendations of their mentors was always silence. Silence. Silence, according to Joana de Angelis, is a courageous defense, is a noble defense. It's written in the book After the Storm. Emmanuel would tell Chico Xavier that the hammer that hits the nail repeatedly makes it sturdier. And so they were called to give a testimony of silence because Rhona told Divaldo, "Don't ever defend yourself. Don't ever defend the spirits who are working with you. We don't need defense. Jesus is our defense." So they went to their lives, receiving sarcastic and destructive criticism, wounding their souls with the thorn of others, witnessing the message many times being ridiculed and trashed, and being loyal to the duty without concerning themselves with the outcome. She didn't tell him what the gains would be, but the gains are for the ones who are able to practice and to live according to the teachings of Jesus. Peaceful conscience. Blessing to witness the multiplication of his psychograph pages. Blessing to witness an increased number of mentors finding his mediumship an adequate channel to speak. Blessing to witness a growing number of people benefiting from the message and the sublime joy of being able to cooperate with the work of Jesus on earth. My final words, I would like them to refer to humbleness. Because that is, in my opinion, the greatest virtue that these mediums have to have in order to be true missionaries and in order to deliver with loyalty the message of Jesus. And we hear so many times, whether it's in our churches or in the Spiritist centers, his invitation. The invitation is that we become small like the children so we can have the kingdom of heaven, that we become the last, the servant, the slave of others, that we take the last seat. And the idea is that we diminish ourselves, but again, diminish ourselves means that we feel so much of God inside us that there is no more need for stage, because now we understand, very much like Divaldo said yesterday, it's not about my light, it's not about the brilliance of my violin, It's about the orchestra. No matter what instrument you are, the important thing is that we together as a whole, working together under the law of cooperation, loving one another, just like Jesus asked us to do so, my disciples will be recognized for the love that they have for one another. We must silence our disagreements. And we must, for once, hear the invitation. And we have the references. We have someone like Chico Xavier, who in the words of Clóvis Tavares said, I have found someone who has denied himself according to Christ's recommendation, someone who has depersonalized. And how did Chico define himself? This enlightened soul. He would say, I'm not irreplaceable. I'm nothing but grass growing on the ground. When the grass dies, another one replaces it. And one day, someone came to him and complimented him and gave him, some nice talk. And he said to the person, please don't do that. I'm nothing but a worm. And Emmanuel, our beloved Emmanuel, said to him, the worm is an excellent employee of the law, paving the success of the seed in the soil by constant work and by being active in the transmutation of wasteland with the utmost fidelity to the role of a humble and valuable server of nature. Do not insult the worm, because as compared to it, much we have yet to learn to be faithful to God in the evolutionary position we already managed to achieve. From that point on, he called himself Subworm. So my last words, I would like for them to be words of gratitude for the presence of these missionaries of love in our lives, not wanting to make them any bigger or any higher than what they are, but in recognize the wonderful, wonderful contribution that they have given us, most especially as being these closer to home references that we can look at and help us in guiding us in our work and in the use of our mediumship. And again, let's live with this idea as we go back to our spiritist centers, as we go back to our spiritist movement, to our churches, to our families, wherever we're going. It's not about me. They too work with the group, with the team. And if you listen to Emmanuel speaking, he considers himself a small link also in this chain of spirits that are working with themselves. So this is what we are, a small link, but a valuable one. We can do wonderful if we learn to work with one another. So that finally, the light of the gospel can shine within us and outside us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now on to more serious stuff. Are we ready?
Yeah.
Please.
Okay. There are two questions here about the hierarchy of the spirits. So I'm going to start here because one says, can you tell me more about the hierarchy of spirits? And the other one, it's funny, it says, this complex hierarchy seems like the military structure for the cover-up of UFOs. It seems these are generals, majors, lieutenants, sergeants, private, etc. So, all right, so let me speak about a little bit about this. Spiritually speaking, hierarchy is not something that is given to anyone, like here on earth, right? You determine that you're going to be the general if you take some courses or do some duties. Spiritually speaking, those are outcomes of achievements, moral achievements by the spirits who will grant them a position, a spiritual position that, again, relates to their morality, to their achievements. That is actually the only true authority that exists. The authority, the titles that we carry here on earth mean nothing once we are the spiritual realm. But our acquisitions in the realm of love and the virtues grant us certain status. So one example, I want to illustrate this idea. We also know that Francis of Assisi, because of his spiritual status, he lives in a level, in a dimension of vibration, because when we become love, then we vibrate in the frequency of love. When we are with our hearts filled with resentment, jealousy, or whatever feelings are related, let's say, more to the material realm, then it's like our energy becomes denser, and we are going to belong to denser realms of life. This is easy to understand. If you're walking around, if you wake up in a day that you are very in peace, you feel like if you're levitating. But if you wake up in the morning and you are so worried and so concerned and so anxious, you feel like you have gained some extra pounds. That is true. Pounds of dense energy that you're carrying around. So when you talk about Francis of Assisi, you're talking about a spirit who is love. And he lives in the levels where love vibrates. Rhona de Angelis, who is a missionary. This woman has, in past lives, been among the martyrs of Christianism. She died in the circus for Jesus Christ. She does not live in the same realm of Francis of Assisi because she does not have yet the purity that he has. So in delivering the mission on earth, she was granted permission to visit him in the realms where he lives once a week. So they to talk about the program. So this is the hierarchy. And for anyone who wants to know more about that, the Spirit's book, The Gospel According to Spiritism, will tell you specifically about the categories of the spirits based, again, on their moral achievement. So it's nothing that is similar to our ranks on earth. On the contrary.
All right. Can you hear me? Loud and obnoxious. You can probably hear me.
Oh, this is a letter.
Okay. So here is an interesting question. Any word on evidence of mediumship with the use of modern technology, MRI, CAT scans, CT scans, and so forth? Actually, there is. We just really ran out of time. We wanted to have talked to you a little bit about, as well about some of the experiments that have carried out recently by a group of both Brazilian and American doctors out in the University of Pennsylvania. We know of it through our friend Dr. Pereira, who was part of the studies. And basically what they've done was really interesting. They've got a series of different mediums with different levels of experience of mediumship practice. Many different years, from 15 years to like 40 years of experience, and they attach different sensors to their brain to see how the brain waves and the brain activity would change during the trance period, to see if this different alternate states of consciousness could be documented and how that would come through. And what they found out actually that it was indeed possible to see different brain activities in different parts of the brain that weren't normally used for that during the regular state, but in trance they light up many different parts at the same time. So it was a really interesting study done in that sense. And they also saw that varied according to the intensity of such, like imagine like a little light kind of blinking in the brain. It changed according to mediumistic experience and ability as well. So we do see a lot of evidence in that sense that indeed there is an alternate state of consciousness, and that different parts of the brain get accessed, or many of them simultaneously sometimes that we normally wouldn't use during that time. And we all heard the experiments too that Divaldo referenced to by similar doctors in Brazil as well, who researched about the pineal gland and the crystals in the gland, and how mediumship ability seems to be correlated to the degree and the quantity of crystals in that gland over time. So they're able to kind of work as like a little chamber that, when waves come in, the crystals like reflect within each other and kind of capture it, kind of like an antenna thing. So there's all kinds of exciting, so there's all kinds of research that not only helps us look deeper into the phenomena of mediumship, but what I find more interesting is they also help understand how it works. And I think that's a subtle distinction when we start moving away from does it exist to how it works. And I think there's a lot of value in it. Like I said, I think most of us are probably satisfied with that it exists, and we're leaning towards more and more into the moral implications of, if it does exist, then what does it mean to us? So I think it's a great shift, like a great mental shift from us as we stop caring about the manifestations and more to the practical applications. But they're out there, so just search it out. Take a look. There's many other studies, I'm sure, but for obvious reasons and for lack of intellectual capacity of your own here, I wouldn't know about them. But there's many out there. It's always interesting to study. And there's others done in the 19th century too. I did not mention Aksakov, the Russian studious member too. So there's a lot of different things out there that you can check out.
This question, speaking about fraternity, not meaning to be controversial, what can Spiritism do to help harmonizing religions, if that's possible? Having seen too much hatred. It is possible. I think that Spiritism has done everything already to help us in doing that. The point is that we need to do our part now. We have all the teachings available since the time of Jesus. Everything is written there. And we can even summarize in one teaching, which is do to others as we wish was done to us. So I think that these events are great, and every time we come and we hear important messages, enlightening messages, but I'll share with you that when I was doing this study, many times I found myself in tears in the realization of how far I am from manifesting all the teachings that I talk about. And so, and this, sometimes it's good to cry. It's sad as Alberto Almeida was, sadness as Alberto Almeida was saying yesterday is not a bad thing. It's this movement of the soul going inwards and looking at itself in the mirror. So I think that that's what we need to do. We need to really, really strive to be the examples of the things that we speak, because no words will change the world, only our ability to manifest them in our actions and in our feelings. And by doing so, we should be able to, yes, have a very positive influence. We talk about Jesus being our only defense system. So many times in our daily lives, we receive attacks. So many times they are so unfair. And what is our line of defense? Do we speak? Do we nurture the attack? Or why do we need defense? Why don't we just be courageous, as Juan de Angelis invites us, by silencing? Because Jesus, if he is our defensor, no other words needs to be spoken.
So I put the puzzle together. It's a three-part question, three-paper question. Things were out of order there. I got confused for a second. So thanks for your patience. So the question goes, could we, with the scientific resources we have now, prove another explanation for the phenomena of the turning tables that is based on the classic materialistic physics? And then the follow-up kind of together is, wouldn't that be another confirmation if we still can't explain what happened back in the 19th century? So could we then, with what we know today, explain the turning tables differently? I think it would be really hard. It would actually be us trying to make up a combination of theories that still wouldn't address the fact that tables rocked, they levitated, they moved around, that the voices command. And that's something that we cannot really explain even today. That's why it was so interesting. And that's why I think the incisive logic of Allan Kardec at the time was so powerful. We all heard his powerful sentence. We saw that in the video too in the first day, that every effect has a cause, right? So if a table moves, it's because somebody pushed it. Tables have no central nervous system. They have no will of their own, at least not my tables. And so therefore we know that they're inanimate beings or things. They're not beings, so they cannot move by themselves. So if you see a table sliding, somebody must have pushed it. Whether you can see the person pushing or you can't see the person pushing it, somebody still pushed it. So that we know. So pushing of a table we could probably explain by science, right? Oh, it was a difference in temperature. Dew was created on the floor and it slid. However, when the table slides in an intelligent fashion, that becomes a problem. And I mean by that is, that's what happened at the time, was they would say, table, move to the right, and the table would move to the right. Table, move to the left, and the table would move to the left, doing the hokey pokey. So the hokey pokey table thing is curious because we cannot explain that by science from even today, because the table was following intelligent commands. And to follow intelligent commands, it has to decode the commands, interpret them, know what they mean, and act accordingly. So that's why Kardec went further in his great didactic approach and said, if every effect has a cause, every intelligent effect must have an intelligent cause. So no dumb automatic phenomena, no dumb intelligence can provide an intelligent thing. So if you can't understand what's left and right is and push it, the table could not have moved it. So we still can't explain it with today's technology. And we have all kinds of great technologies, computers that read your voice and artificial intelligence, and still they would not be able to move the tables in front of so many people like that. So that I think is a fascinating thing. And so I think that and then the third part is, wouldn't that be another confirmation if we still can't explain? Science, materialistic science can't explain it. That's why I call his attention. But the Spiritist science can. So I think the assumption here is there was no explanation for the tables. And no, there was a very clear explanation. And that's why studying in a Spiritist group is so fantastic, because we get to dive into that. And we find an explanation of all these things in the Spiritist science. We find the beginning of the explanation of fluids in the Spirit spoke in the first part. And then we look into the other works, the mediumistic phenomena of apport and movement, and how the spirits do different things. They imbue the materials with a specific fluid that they can then trigger and move around. So there's all kinds of experience, phenomena that can be explained through Spiritist understanding. And obviously we're not going to talk about this right now because it would take a while. We need to build on a series of foundational things to get there, but all of that is within our grasp and within our reach as Spiritists by simply really studying the Spiritist body of knowledge, starting with the Spirit's book, making our way to the Medium's book, all the way to the Genesis, so we understand how these forces were at work, and to fulfill the maxim that the Christ said. Remember that no thing will remain hidden forever. Nobody puts a light under the bed. Right, the light is there for everybody, so we can understand those, and that's the great contribution that Spiritism does, because it demystifies miracles. miracles stop being an aberration, like a law, like a break-in law of something that's not supposed to happen. With the Spiritist knowledge, we understand that the set of rules we have are incomplete. And by understanding these extra rules and how these fluids and these forces work, we can see how that miracle wasn't outside the realm of possibility. It was just a manifestation of some rules and some things that we are not familiar with. Because think here with me. If God is love and God is perfect, why would God break his own rules? Wouldn't it mean that he did not plan right? If he didn't plan right, doesn't it mean he was not omniscient, that he didn't know everything? So by the very definition of God, there can be no exception to his rules, to his order that he set in place. It is just that we don't understand all the rules. Therefore, we think that it's somebody breaking the natural law of things. It's just, with time, just like we do in society, our understanding of rules change and we evolve. Before, it was okay to kill somebody that had killed you, right? It was acceptable. Nowadays, you go to jail for that, hopefully. So we have, as a society, with time we evolve, and so we do evolve in our understanding of things, and thus we are able to explain these things. And that's why we said that Spiritism is a progressive body of knowledge, because it's a tool, it's a method, it's mediumship, it's a method that allows us to gather ever more content, so that as we grow in maturity and understanding, we can gather more knowledge to explain more things and understand how more things progress. So we graduated from 5th grade to 6th grade. Now we know how to multiply. It's basically what the Spirits are saying. And with that, I get off my soapbox.
And that explanation is in the Medium's book, right?
And we find all of that in the Medium's book, and we find the talking about natural laws too on the 3rd part of the Spirit's book and the 4th part. So it's all there. Natural law, human law, what's the difference? It's a great read.
So the next question: do mediums mentors at a mediumistic session have to give permission to any spirits who want to communicate orally? I am not talking about mediums like Chico or Divaldo with such high missions, but ordinary mediums. Does this happen in any ordinary session, disobsession session, etc.? I chose this question just to be able to speak to you a little bit more about our mediumistic sessions in the Spiritist Center. So what is asked from us, the incarnate ones, is to try to not interfere with the work of the spirits. If we can do that, we are helping them a lot, meaning that our role is very little in the meeting. The role, the whole meeting is organized by the spirits who choose in advance the spirits who are going to be participating in their sessions, who bring the spirits to the sessions. Sometimes the spirits are already in the ambience of the Spiritist centers days before, listening to the messages, and then the mentors will also decide which spirits are going to be able to communicate, and will decide through which mediums. Because one of the laws of mediumship is the law of affinity. And so not every spirit is going to be able to manifest so easily through any medium. So the whole session is truly, truly orchestrated in the spiritual realm. And yes, just like you have someone who is directing the session in the physical realm, you have a spirit who is responsible for the work, spiritually speaking, and who will be making these decisions as the session takes place.
Cool. Here's a good question. How to refute the idea that Spiritism and its teachings are tricks from the devil to lead humanity astray? We don't. How do we refute the idea that the Spiritism is something from the devil to fool all of us? We don't. We don't have time for this kind of stuff, right? To engage any kind of conversation about this stuff is to waste time. Either we engage in a debate, or we don't defend ourselves at all. Because what's the point? Suzana just beautifully explained that. If we go into this kind of conversations, nobody gets anything out of it. We're just going to be shouting at each other, trying to convince others of what we think, and we're not here for that. Remember that Christ is the best example that we have, and he's got some great sentences for us. He says, "You know a tree by its fruits." So, if it's working for people and it's making them better and happier people, it's probably a good thing. At the same time, we don't really need to worry that much here, because Christ always says, too, that it is not for the healthy. That it's not the healthy that need a doctor, right? If somebody already has a conception of heaven and hell, of demons, or and so forth, whatever it is you like, or right and wrong, it already works for them. We don't need to go and tell them about morality. We worry about our own take on things. We don't need to engage in this kind of conversation, because, again, it's going to be just a shouting match between people that want to prove other people right, so that we feel better about ourselves. Because ultimately, when we want to convince people, it's really because we are unsure about our own beliefs. If you are sure about your beliefs, you need not engage in needless debate with other people. If you are not sure about your beliefs, you need other people to believe in what you believe, so that you feel better about what you believe. It's a question of numbers. And I think it comes down to everything that we speak about. Our field of work, the invitation is extended to us, as Suzana was talking, is to work on ourselves. What other people think of us, while helpful sometimes, is not the focus of our existence. Like, be yourself. Everybody else is taken. Don't be other people. Right? There are very few things in this world we can control. And none of them are outside of ourselves. Right? We can barely make an effort to control ourselves. So let's focus on that. It is true. It is true. At least, I speak for myself at least. I'm sorry, I shouldn't speak for you. But I can barely control myself. So let's focus on that. And that's what drives us. Because that's the most important thing that we have to do. And ultimately, we are the ones responsible for driving our own cars. Right? So we have to make sure that we are arriving at the destination that we have set for ourselves, so that we can become happier. And by we becoming better people, we make the world better for other people around us, who don't have to deal with our shortcomings and our vices. So let's not engage in who's right and who's wrong or what it is. We all work for the same boss, right? If this is the great departmental, overview of all the religions, there's God on top, and there's all the different departments, right? There's marketing, there's operations, there is accounting. Everybody works from the same God, but oftentimes we get so caught up in our own departments and trying to defend our own budgets and take it away from other people that we fail to see that it's all the same boss, right? So let's focus on that instead and be happy about the great many things that bring us together. And the new age, we are told constantly, and we've been told this for thousands of years, you will know my disciples, like Suzana was saying, that by the way they treat each other, the way they love, because we're all working for the same boss. So let's focus on that instead.
The next question is, why, even though we receive the intuition of our mentors, we insist in doing the opposite? Could you give us an example of how we can combat this tendency? Well, this is precisely the journey, no? If I knew the answer for this, I wouldn't be sitting here with you. I would be in Alcione, more evolved planet, right? So it is the journey. We are divine beings, and people are often asking, why didn't God make us already, ready, right? Well, God made us perfect and put in our hearts and in our spirits the seeds of His divinity. And He wanted for us to build ourselves, so we get the amazing taste of overcoming unawareness. And if you have experienced that, it would be different if it was given to us, and when we actually accomplish it, that you're actually able to change, to shift inside yourself, and to overcome something, a pattern, a behavior that has been with you for such a long time. This is, in Spiritism, the only true miracle that exists. It's the miracle of inner transformation. And so, if you have ever experienced that, you know what I'm talking about. It's the most wonderful feeling that exists. One that time will not destroy. It will never be taken for you. It stays with you forever. But it's a process. God wanted to be like this. And in this process, we have to understand that a lot of times, part of the human suffering is that, and Spiritists are very good at that, they wanted to be perfect tomorrow. It doesn't happen like this. That's not the way God wanted it to be. And before we want to be angels, we need to be humans. Because a lot of times we're still so driven by our instincts. The instincts prevail. The instincts, if you study the Spirit's book, you learn that they are not the evil. They are neutral. They are part of our evolution. We are instinctive beings at the beginning because it's important for us in the very beginning of our existence to fight for our lives, to defend our families. And so the process of enlightenment happens as we develop our reason, and above our reason, our feelings. And it's not that instincts go away, but they override the instincts. And that's what characterizes a human being, different than an animal. It's the fact that with our intelligence and our feelings, we have the instinct, but they are under our command. So we can choose to act or not to act. And so many of us, this humanity is a humanity that is closer to the beginning than it is to the end. So that's just our nature. A lot of times we are lost in illusions because, not because we are bad, but because actually darkness is also an illusion, it's only the absence of light. So one day light will prevail, right? But it is a process. And so this exercise of free will, of trial and error, is precisely what the journey is about. And transformation is a slow process, especially in these realms where we are still. It's very slow. It takes a long time because we are very, very close to the instinctive life still. It takes a lot of practice. And that's precisely why we incarnate. So we can be here dealing with the challenges of earthly life, and little by little. But we have to have responsibility, try to develop awareness, but also have compassion and humbleness. Because a lot of times, and Dr. Lírio Cerqueira Filho is very good when he speaks about that, the suffering comes from the fact that we don't accept our own humanity. We want to be so perfect that when we commit the mistakes, that causes an immense amount of suffering in us. Whereas if we could just say, okay, I am human. That's part of my learning. So you take that mistake and you ask yourself, what's the lesson here? What is it in me that I need to change? And understand. This is something that I always try to bring when I speak about this topic, which is, if the knowledge of Spiritism would automatically make us better persons, none of us would be here, no? Right? So there is a time and there is a process to bring the knowledge from the mind into the heart. And so many times we're going to know something, we're going to want to do according to what we know, and we are not able to. A lot of times because in the course of many different lives we have act in different ways. And so it's very difficult. It's very difficult to change. But always, always bear in mind that the evolution happens in a spiral. Many times people come to me and say, I have been trying for such a long time and I have not moved forward not only 1 inch. That is not true. That is not true. Even though you don't see the changes, a lot of times, one mistake after another, that builds within you. And it's going to be the foundation where one moment you can't take that anymore. It becomes absolutely unbearable, that experience, and you find from within you the forces and the strength and the courage to change. And the miracle takes place. So it may take a long time, but just keep believing on you. And probably the reason why many people don't think it's possible is that one of the most important components in the process of inner transformation is perseverance.
So we probably can take one more question each, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay. From all the examples that you presented, which study do you personally believe in the most? Do you believe is the most comprehensive one that can be presented to someone that never had any exposure to Spiritism? I think that the most, at least for me, personally speaking, because you opened the door, you said you personally, so I'm going to come out personally. Thanks for asking. I actually think in the conjunction of all of them, the sum of all of them together speak to me because of that universal control of the spirits that Kardec brings forward. The fact that there's so many different instances of different people at different times doing different things points me to the fact that this is indeed something that needs to be considered seriously. So basically I find that there's an overwhelming body of evidence in favor of mediumship. Needless to say that I'm a believer. But so I think that's one of the most interesting things. So it's really difficult to say which one, because we also have to be mindful, like what we said before, we have to be okay with the fact that you might present things to people and they might not accept it. And that's really one of the toughest things for us to settle with, because we want other people to sometimes partake in the joy that we have found. We want them to see the beauty that we have. But one of the fundamental tenets of Spiritism is respect for other people's free will. Much the same way that we have our free will, they have our free will. So we have to be comfortable with the fact that other people may not see things the way we do. It's really a tough lesson to do it. But if I may go in a parenthesis really quick here, and I think this is a beautiful lesson, because if you even look at the New Testament, for instance, which is a fantastic book, I think divinity intended for us to be tolerant of other people and know how to navigate different perspectives, because we have 4 different accounts from 4 different witnesses: John, Luke, Mark, and Matthew. And they share some things in their accounts, but they're different. And we have 4 different accounts in the book as to make us triangulate and reach our conclusions for ourselves. So it's a fantastic thing how divinity works. We can go into how the Bible was made, but 4 accounts, different accounts came in there as to have 4 different witnesses and 4 different approaches, as to remind us that there's different ways of looking at it. Some people will prefer some, other people will prefer others. But Kardec himself leaves us a very powerful notion as an educator in the introduction to the Medium's book, in which he says, before you make them spiritists, make them spiritualists. You have to believe in existence of the soul before you can believe in reincarnation and mediumship and so forth, right? Trying to show that mediumship exists in somebody is probably unlikely if they don't think that the body survives after the body. But I think what's most interesting is what Kardec says afterwards. He says, any field of study, any kind of thing, must proceed from what is known to what is unknown. So what is the experience that you know of that the person is familiar with? Give them something similar to that. Because what works for me, again, might not work for you. So it's more of a personal thing. I think you need to kind of, if you know the person, what do you think would be most interesting to open the doors for the person to go out there and find their information for themselves? And it's really quite a beautiful, I think, moral thing when we grapple and settle with that knowledge of, wow, I respect you, you respect me, we can exchange ideas, and boy, am I glad we don't think the same way, right? Because if the blind leads the blind, we all fall in the ditch, right? Jesus used to say. So let's appreciate that, let's respect that, and let's see that that's, in fact, the only way through which we will gain different knowledge. And we are about progressing, gaining different knowledge so that we can then make our own decisions and reap the benefits of our decisions and evolve.
One more? Yeah. Your last question? Yeah, you can take one more.
I wasn't
Yeah.
prepared. I thought
That's
that was
okay.
the last
Just,
one.
be inspired.
Let me see. A medium once gave me a message, and the one part which I could not fully understand was, remember your mission, what you came here to do. How can we find out what our mission is on Earth? I want to know what my mission is.
Sometimes our mission is to find out what our mission is.
Yeah, right? Well, I'll say two things. One is look at yourself and see what the difficult areas of your life is. There lies your mission. There lies your mission. You know, we all have an individual mission, but our first mission is in our self-renewal. So a lot of times you don't need to go through past life regressions or anything like that to know where are your exposed nerves. All you need to do is an honest look at your own life, and you will know the areas that you need to work. And a lot of times, you know, there will be signs, opportunities that it seems to us casualties in our lives, but they are leading us in certain ways and certain paths. So I don't know. I can't say anything else. What do you think, Daniel?
It's a good question. When everything else fails, you read the manual, right? That's what men do when they're assembling IKEA furniture. And
where can we find
and
that?
one of the manuals is the Spirit's book. And in the absence of some things, there's a lovely question, which it's question 132. The reason I remember because it really spoke to me. I know. I sound very smart.
That's
no, it's like the one question I remember the number to.
I know number one.
Number one's good, yeah. That's a good one. That's a good one. But 132 says, you know, what's the purpose of our incarnation here on Earth? And we get the two answers, which is surprising, because we often think it's like, oh, and one answer is basically is to evolve, right? To be better, and that's obviously I think goes along what Suzana was saying, which is look in yourself and you find how to do this. It's tough. It's not easy. It's not an easy thing. But part number two surprised me a little bit because we're so selfish. Well, at least I'm going to speak more. So I am so selfish that you know, like part one, I was satisfied. Oh yes, I need to improve myself. But part number two says, but there's an extra role that we all must play and that we often forget, which is to take our part in the creation. And that is to say, not only must we improve ourselves, but we must play a role in improving creation as a whole.
Like the worm.
Like the worm.
Right.
Perfectly well said. Well said.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Simões and Daniel. Thank you. Appreciate it. Folks, just before